Hello, it's Nikolai Warren here again with the final video in this series of 5 videos about organization design ideas that may change the world. Many people in this field have asked whether organizations can become more democratic and less hierarchical. A number of experiments with radically new and alternative organizational forms have been attempted, but few of them have been successful. Yet there's one idea that I think deserves a hearing and that might provide an alternative for creating a democratic and effective organization. So keep watching to find out more. Most of us work in hierarchical organizations where we have a role at one level of a management hierarchy and where we report to a manager at the next level. Organizations are like pyramids in the sense that there are fewer at the top than at the bottom, and it's the boss at the top that has the most power. There's a wonderful book called Top Down, written by the late Professor Harold Levitt, who was at Stanford University. In it, he describes the basic ambivalence that many of us feel with regards to hierarchies. On the one hand, they are universally used for getting things done. On the other hand, the values of a hierarchy seem to conflict with the personal values that we hold. We live in democracies, and we don't like the autocratic elements of hierarchies, particularly not in organizations with highly competent knowledge workers. Can we imagine organizations that are democratically governed? Would we be able to create such organizations? Would such organizations be viable? Could a business firm be organized in this way? And would it be able to compete in a changing marketplace? Or would people be bogged down in endless discussions and be unable to reach a decision? There have been many attempts at introducing alternative models. During the 1960s, in particular, a number of organizations tried to remove the hierarchy. They were able to design a more democratic organization, but what they were not able to do was to create an effective and efficient organization. As Levitt explains in his book, most of the experiments were brief and chaotic. In my own book, I describe the case of Oticon, the Danish hearing aid manufacturer. It introduced the so-called spaghetti organization during the early 1990s. It was supposed to be a decentralized organization without a formal structure. A few years later, when business school professor Nikolai Foss examined how the company worked, he found that it was actually highly centralized, with the CEO making most of the important decisions about projects and resources and funding. And the company conceded that the spaghetti organization had flaws and later chose to introduce a conventional structure with management layers. More recently, management guru Gary Hamel published an article in Harvard Business Review about Morningstar, a food processing company in the US. And this company apparently does not have any managers and relies on self-management instead. I only know this company from the article, but it seems to be doing a lot of things right. It gives frontline people a lot of autonomy and relies to a great extent on customer-supplier relationships between the units inside the company. But Gary Hamel goes farther than this. He claims that the company does not have a hierarchy. Is this really true? I'm afraid that there is reason for some doubt. A former employee of Morningstar who wrote a reply on the HBR blog argued that the article is misleading because there in fact is a hierarchy within this company, even though nobody has the title of manager. As he pointed out, anybody who has the right to hire and fire is in fact a boss. There are many stories like these ones that have later proved to be exaggerated, to say the least. So we should be skeptical when people claim that you can fire all the managers and create entirely new forms of organizations, whether they are called flat or network-based or democratic. I'm also skeptical, but I have come across one concept that I think might be more realistic, and which in fact I believe has great potential, and which I for that reason include on my list of the 5 most important organization design ideas. First of all, we should clarify a couple of things about how we define democracy here. Some people seem to think that it means that everybody should be able to vote on every decision. But that's not necessarily the case. I live in a democratic country, but that doesn't mean that I get to vote every time a new decision has to be made in the government. Others think that democracy equals a flat organization, in other words, a non-hierarchical organization without managerial levels. But that's not true either. Even in democratic societies, political institutions and the executive branch in particular certainly have a hierarchical structure. So I think a key obstacle in some previous attempts have been that one has simply used the wrong definition of democracy. A second big shortcoming of previous attempts have been that one has posed the wrong question. The real challenge is not to create democracy in itself, or more engagement or more participation, but to do those things while at the same time maintaining or enhancing efficiency and effectiveness. In a previous video in this series, I spoke about the need for identifying and recognizing contradictions. We need to keep 2 or more goals in our minds at the same time. Creating a more democratic organization should not compromise the ability to get things done. The most promising approach that I have come across is the concept of the circular organization proposed by Russell Ackoff. He said that the key principle of democracy is the absence of ultimate authority. So he came up with the design for an organization where anybody who has authority over others is also subject to their collective authority. And he claimed that this in fact should increase the ability to get things done, because by increasing participation in decision making, you should get stronger buy-in and thereby a stronger willingness to implement decisions. The central idea is to provide every manager in the organization with a board. Let's consider a simple example here and look at how this would be done for a unit of 5 employees. The board would include the manager from the unit, the employees from the unit, the manager at the next level, as well as managers from other units at the same level. Ackoff was skeptical of electing worker representatives, as we do here in Scandinavia for corporate boards. He recommended that all of the employees participate on the board as long as the number of employees in the unit was not too high. The key responsibility of the board would be to set the main policies for the unit, plan the main activities, and coordinate with other units. There are several interesting elements with this approach, and which I think makes it a more realistic option compared to the experiments I mentioned earlier. First of all, responsibility remains with the manager for day-to-day decision making. The board is mainly focused on policies and principles, which in turn must be compatible with policies set by boards at higher levels. the interlocking membership structure, where the manager participates in the higher level board and vice versa, and participation by managers at the same level, is a mechanism that should facilitate both vertical and horizontal coordination. So this idea is not about removing managers or eliminating hierarchy, although it may enable a somewhat flatter organizational structure. At the same time, Ackoff did point out that it rested on a revised notion of the role of managers. He did not see the role of managers as that of supervising or motivating employees. He said that the key role of a manager was to create an effective work environment. The role is not to manage actions, but interactions, for example, coordinating with other units at the same level and with higher level units. He proposed that the board should meet once a year and offer constructive criticism to the manager. Consistent with the criteria I just mentioned, when the subordinates provide this feedback, the purpose is not to evaluate the boss' performance per se, but to provide suggestions for how he or she can enhance their effectiveness as subordinates by creating the right work environment and the right context for their work. Finally, unlike some other ideas, this approach can be implemented in steps. One can start by establishing the board structure, initially in one part of the organization, and then in the rest, as one learns how to operate it. Then, once the board structure is in place and one is confident that it's working, one can increase the authority of the boards to select the unit manager, which is perhaps the most controversial element, but one that is needed for a fully democratic system. Another neat thing about Ackoff's idea is that it is compatible with two other important concepts: the notion of an internal market economy and the use of customer-supplier relations between internal units. The three concepts reinforce each other if they are implemented together. I think the basic message here is that governance systems require a set of rules and principles. Just as in a democratic society, you have to specify those rules and establish some constraints for the system to be effective inside an organization. I would expect that one will be able to further refine these ideas, but Ackoff's description of the democratic organization is so far the best I have encountered, and one that may allow us to combine different goals such as participation and efficiency. This was the final of the videos that I had planned about important organization design ideas. I hope you have found them useful, and let me know if you have any questions or comments. And of course, if you're not subscribing already, I would love to have you as a subscriber to the blog. Talk to you soon. Cheers.